Hello, happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome to the MediaJel podcast, where we cover the latest in marketing trends and strategies that are most effective in growing your cannabis store, your delivery service, or your cannabis brand. Here at MediaJel, we have a compliant ad network of 75,000 plus publishers, including mainstream news sites, meme sites, dating, gaming, music streaming, and beyond. And they all welcome cannabis ads compliantly. So yes, you can advertise on mainstream media. And we at MediaJel, we help do this through a combination of paid search, Google ads and Bing ads, SEO, so driving organic traffic through Google and Bing and beyond, and then also programmatic display advertising. And all this is meant to drive foot traffic, e-commerce sales, and increase awareness. I'm your host, Guillermo Bravo, and today we'll be discussing how cannabis businesses can set themselves up to see a $1 million return on ad spend. You heard me right, $1 million. Well, we've done that time and time again for some of our partners here and at MediaJel, and we're excited to share some of these case studies with you. And I'm really excited to introduce our MediaJel expert, Samer Alkis, who's the VP of Search here at MediaJel. Welcome to today's podcast, Samer.
How are you?
Good. How's everything down in sunny San Diego?
Oh, everything's great. I'm happy to be here, happy to chat with you and talk about some really cool case studies that we've seen over the last year or so.
Awesome. Well, the first one, first of all, the goal of the call today is to showcase some of the successes that we've had at MediaJel and discuss what it takes to actually generate $1 million in revenue from SEO, from paid search, from programmatic, and beyond. So let's take a look at case study one. So I'll pull this up in a second here. And this can all be found on the MediaJel website. I'll post this link in the Zoom chat as well for any of our attendees here. So the first one we're going to look at is Haven. And they are out of California. Mm-hmm. Or actually, this one's Maryland. Sorry, my apologies. Let me pull this up. Perfect. So Haven, this is the case study on the website for the retail location out of Maryland. Haven's problem was, they really wanted to increase e-commerce sales. Haven's e-commerce sales were lagging, and they knew that they could, reach more people if they just had the support. And being in Maryland, they were a medical dispensary, right? So they have a limited number of patients. They're not reaching the full adult use market. So their in-store team had been creating some fun new content for their blog and their videos in the form of like strain reviews. But they needed more support to make sure that they were getting, seen by the right people. And then the solution was, Haven started to invest in a full SEO strategy with MediaJel to get more people to their website, and it paid off big. So let's dive into some of the numbers here. Boom, boom, boom. So in 1 year, from Q1 in 2020 to 2021 of Q1, our SEO services doubled the number of organic site visitors to their site and increased their revenue substantially. So in that year, they drove $1.2 million in revenue. And in this case study in particular is pertinent as it occurred when companies were pulling back on their marketing spends. They were there's all the uncertainty with COVID. This was early 2020, right? That March is when we got that notification of the shutdowns, and then everyone panicked, right? So now with the recession and sales kind of slowing down to pre-COVID numbers, businesses are worried again. But this case study really shows that there is marketing channels if you stick with it and stay the course. So from an SEO perspective, we know there are multiple stages of executing an SEO, Samer. SEO plans are never cookie cutter, right? Like they're always based on a lot of factors that we'll go into today. But when you're building from the ground up in some of these cases, and with Haven, this wasn't an overnight $1 million ROI. Like this, they spent money on SEO for over a year. So Samer, can you talk to us about where you started with Haven? What did you assess in the initial audit, and what SEO tasks did you recommend tackling first?
Yeah, with I think before we jump into just Haven, I think SEO in general, it's a very common thought that it is something that's going to take a little bit longer to see results on because of how Google operates. And Haven, they're a prime example of how the overall effort that's being put in starts compounding over time, and then you start seeing results later on that are really a benefit from the work that you were doing a little bit earlier on in the campaign. Whether it's month 3, month 4 of the work, and the results are showing up, you'll start seeing incremental performance improvements early, hopefully if you're doing the right things, but it really is a longer play. And I think that's really important to note for all of these case studies that will be going on, that we'll be reviewing today on the SEO side, is that it's a real long-term play. So with Haven in particular, one of the things that we end up always seeing and having whenever we're working with a partner who they might be newer, or even a partner that we've been working with for a long time, is the way that Google's algorithm works is that it's constantly changing, whether it's a big change. For example, a few years back, they were really targeting link farms. So they didn't want you to have low quality links. And so they let you know that. But more commonly, you'll start seeing small algorithm updates that Google will just let you know there's been an update without any real information. And the reason that's really important is that a static or cookie cutter SEO plan that you might have done in, let's say in 2019, you're going to need to really modify your approach to SEO in 2020, because in that 1 year, there's probably going to be 3 or 4 changes within Google's algorithm. So for Haven in particular, it wasn't necessarily that they were doing poorly in the past, is that a lot of the old SEO tactics were just not as heavily weighted with Google in the start of this campaign, once we start seeing a lot of the changes we started making and started seeing the performance improvements. So that's something just to keep in the back of your mind, is that your SEO plan should constantly be evolving and modifying based off of a couple of things that we'll cover today. So Guillermo, you kind of hit on it. First thing that you kind of want to do, especially with Haven, we looked at where we were from a foundational standpoint for the site, and really auditing not only the technical aspects that we know are valuable to Google, but also where are we kind of stacking up in the search results page, but more importantly, who is above us and who's directly below us from a competitor set standpoint for the keywords or for the search phrases that we find to be of high value. And the way that we approached Haven wasn't necessarily just trying to hit a home run right away, because there had to be this build process from a strategy standpoint. And so the way we looked at it was bucket number 1, what kind of educational information can we present to Google and to users that maybe isn't financially, the goal isn't a financial return, right? So state level laws about buying cannabis, information around how you actually go and purchase a product in store. So more of that upper funnel informational content types that are not going to generate a ton of revenue, but what they give you is brand visibility. And one of the big things within the cannabis space across all these different states that we are partners with is that you're going to be competing with not only legal dispensaries in your region, but you're also going to be competing with some, black market dispensaries. And so the biggest area of how you can possibly maximize your visibility is to create some brand stickiness. And that's where some of those educational pieces of content will give you a visibility improvement, can get you to engage with a user and then get in front of them for the very first time. So that was our first goal, really expanding that Haven visibility. The in-store experience at Haven is fantastic. The ownership is amazing. Pricing is just in line with the rest of the market, but it was really an issue of brand stickiness. And so creating a lot of that information on the website that gives you a little bit more reach potential, knowing that we're not really trying to get revenue right off the start, but we're trying to create a little bit of brand equity to then compound into some sales in the back end. So that was goal number 1, really expanding the brand and creating a little bit of stickiness for the users. So then that way, when they're looking for a product to purchase, if it's between us and a couple of other competitors in the results, they have already some experience with us in some way or another, and then they'll feel a little bit more inclined to go with us potentially. So that was really goal number one, is really creating a little bit more brand awareness and brand stickiness. In the short term.
Awesome. And I know that Google My Business is a top priority for local SEO. Can you expand on how a cannabis retailer can level up their GMB profiles? Any advice there? Yeah,
absolutely. Your Google My Business profile, whether you're a single store or a multi-store operator, it's going to be the second most important thing in your portfolio besides your website when it comes to visibility. And Google My Business is even more vital when we're thinking about how do we get local revenue generating for your store. And so with Google My Business, a lot of times whenever we're working with a newer partner that have a Google My Business setup, we typically tend to see the same type of issues consistently. It's a lot of our partners, when we first work with them, they'll have the Google My Business verified, which is wonderful. They'll have their brand name in there, hours of operation, and a couple of photos. And that tends to be it. In order to really take your Google My Business profile to that next level, there's a lot of small and big tweaks you can make to the profile to give you visibility in the Google local pack. But what I would say as like probably my top three, if I were going to give a recommendation to people who are listening in today, is really leverage consistency in your NAP, really, really basic stuff. So your name, address, phone number, make sure that that's consistent across your website, your GMB profile. And if you're doing some sort of local citation development through Yext or Moz Local, making sure all that information is consistent. That's probably the most basic advice I can give, because it does make a big difference when it comes to having uniform information for Google to match up against and then display your listing for. I think the other one is your classification of your business is really important. About a couple of years ago, Google rolled out a cannabis store classification, which wasn't available in the past. And so that's really important, because when people do make that dispensary near me search or medical marijuana dispensary and then location, that cannabis store classification is going to give you a leg up versus, let's say, somebody who's classifying their dispensary as a alternative medicinal practitioner. So like something small like that is a huge boost. But I think also the last one is you want to have some sort of content on your GMB profile. That's really helpful. But the recommendation isn't just content. I think it's keyword amplification within your Google My Business profile. So you can amplify and target keywords within your description. Yep. Google says that they don't really weight keywords within your business name, but as long as you're not keyword stuffing and it makes sense and it's actually part of your business, having some sort of an insertion of dispensary or cannabis store or something along those lines in your actual naming title of your GMB profile does carry weight and does shift visibility. Now, the one caveat with that is that if you are targeting, let's say, cannabis in your brand name, you're probably not going to have a lift on the term marijuana and vice versa. So you kind of have to know that if you do target one of those keywords within your brand name in your GMB profile, it's not going to be applicable across the other iterations of cannabis or marijuana keywords. So it's really specific to a small silo, but it is really helpful to know that you kind of want to look at your GMB profile in the same way that you would look at your website. And keyword focus is a really important part of amplifying your GMB visibility.
Wonderful. And we do have a question from the audience from Steve Mendez. Does this work for B2B, like a cannabis compliance consultant?
It does. GMB does, like that same type of optimization would work, but your targeting would be different. If you're going after B2B, you're going to be going after a much smaller customer set, really specific in the type of user you're going after. And from my experience, and this is going to be variable per business, a lot of times those B2B consumers won't necessarily be engaging or be putting as much effort into looking at your GMB profile. They're going to be really engaging with the results in Google that are maybe more tied into your business. So getting a little bit more information on your website is more vital, I think, on the B2B side than the enhanced optimization for GMB. GMB is still important, But because you're not really targeting those local users as aggressively on B2B, you're probably going to want to shift a lot more of your focus onto the physical website versus your GMB profile.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Samra. And we definitely leverage this for our own B2B marketing. So I can attest that this is an effective, lead generation channel for your B2B business. Can you give us a little insight into website schema and why it's important for SEO, especially for local retailers?
Yeah. Absolutely. So schema is one of the first things that we'll do on a new partner engagement within the first 30 days or so.
Okay.
And the reason you want to have schema, and what schema is in essence, is that when Google comes to your website, they'll look around and you have content, you have all these other pieces of information on your site, and to Google, it's all unstructured, right? So you'll have your brand name, your logos, your content, your landing pages, but it's kind of all in a jumble, and Google's trying to dissect the information and then present what's relevant to the user in the search results. By having schema implemented, whether it's organization schema, local schema, product schema, there's millions of schema types. And you can actually go to schema.org to look at the different schema types and the different formats that you can deploy schema. But what that allows you to do is when you're deploying schema on your site, Google then will get onto all of that unstructured information, and then to Google now it's structured. And so it makes sense. You call out logos, you call out content, you call out address information, which makes the flow of Google dissecting it and parsing that information so much simpler. But another benefit to schema is that when you're in Google and you're making a search, a lot of times you'll see a few different results. You'll have a regular search result, but then you'll have a rich snippet. And the rich snippets are only going to be available to you. You have the ability to get Google to display them if you have schema deployed on your website. And what that is that you'll be able to call out reviews. You'll be able to call out your phone number or other really important information on your landing page that you won't get displayed by Google without having that schema implemented. So it helps Google understand your website a little bit better. And more importantly, it gives you more ownership of Google's front page because you take up more space. You give the user more options to click on elements of your website. And on mobile, that's very important because, like we know, your mobile real estate is really small. And so the more space you take up, the more you knock your competitors down and you kind of own that entire phone screen space, which is going to get you a higher click engagement rate.
Wonderful. Thanks, Samra. Schema is key. It's one of the most important elements for local SEO. And if you're doing, if you have a self-hosted e-commerce menu, it's really important for SEO for your products as well. So
exactly. And what I recommend when you're on schema.org, there's going to be a number of different ways that you can create schema and deploy schema. Google does recommend using JSON, and then it's a schema type, and then they recommend deploying it using Google Tag Manager. So then that way, the Tag Manager script is what loads one time. It doesn't slow down your site versus deploying JSON schema hard-coded on your individual landing pages, which could have a little bit of a load page issue. So just something to consider. Use JSON schema. Look at the type of schema that you're looking to deploy. I would recommend local and organization at the bare minimum, and then deploy it via GTM, which would make everyone's life, including Google's life, easier.
Yeah, awesome. All right, let's hop on to the next case study here. We have Ethos. So, at Ethos, we really wanted to ensure market dominance for all their search terms. So, they started a campaign with us in May of 2021. Sales began to flatten after the initial boost from COVID, and they wanted to really strengthen their online presence and ensure ranking dominance to continue to drive their organic traffic and online sales. So they began to invest $2,000 a month in an SEO strategy that included on-site and off-site optimization, link building, and guest posting. So by ensuring that their site is user-friendly and optimized for their top keywords, they were able to gross $4.3 million in online revenue from organic traffic, with 34,000 plus sales. And let's pull that up here. 34,000 online orders and an average order of $122. So that was over the course of 1 month. That was actually March. My apologies there. But Samra, let's dive into this campaign a little bit. I know that you are really hands-on and working on this campaign. Do what was the game plan for Ethos, and how long did it take to generate this kind of ROI?
Yeah, Ethos was a really exciting project to work on for a couple of different reasons. One, they're a multi-state, multi-store operator. And the exciting part about working on a partnership like that is that you can test out different SEO strategies in different markets. Maybe it's a strictly medical market, maybe it's a hybrid market of rec and medical, or maybe it's just rec. And different tactics work a little bit different for those markets. And so we have a really great relationship with the people at Ethos, and they really give us a lot of freedom to test things out. And so one of the first things that we were really talking about was not necessarily looking at just top line revenue for Ethos as a whole, but how do we start really owning and carving out more market share in individual high priority locations?
Yep.
And then by focusing on very specific locations at the start, instead of trying to do everything all at once, you're able to get really specific about where your deficiencies are in those markets. So is your deficiency content? Is your deficiency something technical? And when I say deficiency, I don't mean that you're doing poorly in it. You're just not maybe getting as much visibility as other people in the market that you're competing with. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to conquest those competitors and then show up in the top position across all search engines. So then that way, we're able to get maximum exposure and maximum engagement. So with Ethos, the entire plan was really market specific. And we did start off in the hybrid markets with rec and medical being a focus, and started really looking at where are really the areas of opportunity when it comes to education. Where are the areas of opportunity on the website for these pages to create a better UX for that user who comes onto the website? So if they come through the homepage or a store location page, how do we nurture them to get to that checkout flow? So that was also part of it. Heat mapping was really important to really identify the engagement types and how much the time on individual pages look like on top of what we're seeing in Google Analytics. So market by market strategy was really important. And then once we're deploying, whether it's new content, technical changes, cleaning up backlinks that were built in the past that were of lower quality, and getting something a little bit more high quality into Google's index from a backlink standpoint was really important. But the thing that really made this successful was the ability to deploy changes on the SEO side at a market by market level. And then at that point, starting to monitor progress without having to worry about needing to have progress showing up in a couple of weeks. So that was really important. And that's where that partnership is so vital, being able to really have an honest conversation about, hey, this is looking great. Directionally, the information maybe is not looking great. So what can we tweak? But really putting your finger on the pulse of consistent competitors that are in the market, and then really being siloed in regards to your approach at individual DMAs, and then changing that approach depending on what you're seeing in market for different locations. I think that's really important. I think the cookie cutter approach might give you the ability to do work in scale, but every market is so different, and the interactions from Google to the user is very different. So you really should have a bit of a more of a custom strategy and look at every market with a lens of you haven't seen anything in that market yet, and really approach it fresh. And that's what we did with Ethos. And with Ethos, we started seeing performance after maybe a couple of months. And by hyper focusing our attention at individual DMAs, there was a compounding effect where once we started seeing incredible performance and ranking number one in the search results, ranking number one in the Google listings, in the local pack, we started seeing a compounding because our domain authority started to increase. And then Google was like, oh, this is a reputable site. They started to then show us up against some of the really big players in these local markets, these gigantic multi-store dispensaries that we're going head to head with at a fraction of the SEO budget, which was really, really nice to see.
Yeah, it's amazing. With the limited budget, we were able to really knock it out of the park and generate a substantial return on investment for SEO. Can you dive in a little bit more into the keyword and content plan that you built for Ethos?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we approached the keyword plan was in a few different buckets. Bucket number one was what are our local pack keyword targets? So for example, what keywords do we want to really target for the people that are within 5 or 6 miles of a store, as an example. And those are going to be really focused around geo-modified dispensary terms. So dispensary in Baltimore, keywords like that. Identifying those keywords and matching them back to GMB and the location pages was keyword set identification number 1. But number 2, the really important thing in number 2 was, what can we do on the website that was not a near me or a local geo-modified keyword set that will allow us to have visibility for products or categories that are really top of mind in market. So for example, if you're in a market, and what we did with Ethos is that they had certain markets where certain product types like flour or certain types of strains or certain types of edibles, whatever it is, not brand types, but more of like an effect type or a strain type, really expanding on education around those. And it kind of goes back to a sales funnel. That bucket number 2 is going to be that top funnel of getting that at bat with that user. Well, who we're generally competing with when we're going after those longer tail, broader match keywords that are more educational, you're going to be competing with Leafly. You're going to be competing with Weed Maps. You're going to probably also, depending on the state, be competing with some .gov websites. But the really exciting thing is that you're not going to see a lot of competition with other dispensaries. A lot of other dispensaries are so hyper-focused on immediate revenue that they completely miss 3/4 of the sales funnel. And so by jumping into that, getting some exposure early on will give you a leg up, because once you start getting visibility, let's say you're in position 3 or 4 for something educational, and you're competing with Weed Maps, the .gov site, and then it's you, well, then you have so much more leeway with Google to rank for associated keywords or associated pages that might be tied into that educational piece. So that bucket number 2 of education, again, going back to what we kind of approach it with Haven, that's vital because it's just missed so often within the industry because everyone just wants immediate revenue. And then bucket number 3 is going to be those e-com related non-local phrases. So how do we start ranking, not in the local pack, but in the regular search results for our store pages, for regions around our store that we want to maybe target that they don't have a dispensary near them. So those geo-modified local keywords that are not Google My Business focused, those keywords would be more mid to bottom funnel. And what we're trying to do there is drive the action of a conversion. So what you want to do with your keyword sets, and this is what we do with Ethos, is really break up the keywords based off of the type of engagement that we want, depending on the location, and then really leaning into that strategy when it comes to content amplification, correction of content development, new content development, link building. So all of those tactics will fall into the direction of your keyword strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much endless what you can do on the keyword strategy. There's so many opportunities, especially if you're in multiple cities, states, and beyond. And then just thinking of all the evergreen content, there's tons of content that you can put out there on consumption, best practices on sativa versus indica, terps, whatever it might be. There's so much information that customers need to know, especially the cannabis curious people that don't really know anything about cannabis. Maybe it's their first time engaging with the plant. So you really want to keep that in mind, that you have all these different customer segments that you need to communicate with.
Yeah, and one thing that I just want to put out there is when you do go on a lot of dispensary sites, they have blogs, and the topics are the same. Almost all, they're all the same. So our recommendation is to look at a different topic type or something that might be associated with that topic, but is looking at it from a different lens. And one really common one is sativa versus indica. Just talking to a lot of people in the industry, that's a really outdated and antiquated way of looking at cannabis as a whole, but it's still the way that the general public looks at it. So it's more about how do we re-educate people on the sativa versus indica versus explaining what it is. So it's more about looking at content types in a different way so you stand out more. Otherwise, you're just going to get buried in the same topics that everyone creates. And I can tell you right now, there's about 15 common topics that everyone has content on. And it's just a very common thing that we find. So it's about really being a bit more creative and then also educating people and continuing to educate people on how to look at cannabis and making them a little bit more comfortable with the overall industry as a whole.
And also, bringing in Jackie DeVore's question here is, you can also do videos, right? So Jackie has a question. How would you think about a SEO strategy for ranking video search results? We're trying to learn more about the trends towards video and how Google is thinking about ranking those results.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with video in general, when you're thinking about how you want to amplify it, is you want it to be tied into YouTube. So you can always have video content on your website, right? A couple of things about that make it better for your website is make sure when you're deploying a video, the video landing page loads are not slow. That's really important. Also, having some sort of content or a transcript that is below the video as readable content would be really beneficial, because with Google, they can get to your video, but they're not going to be able to really digest the content within it on your site. So what you want to do is you want to give Google something that they can actually parse and read and then index. Because what you ideally would like to do is rank within Google's search results page for your video page, but also the second largest search engine in the entire world is YouTube. And YouTube functions like SEO did 15 years ago. So developing a channel, having groups in that channel of playlists, optimizing your individual videos with keywords and descriptions and timestamps, and then linking that to your landing page and vice versa to your YouTube channel from your website, I think is really important. But also, what I found with YouTube optimization is that the more info that you put in your description, it's not going to be that beneficial. It's really about summarizing, getting content in there, providing jump timestamps, having timestamps in the video, and then engaging with comments. And that's going to be all huge, because how YouTube works versus Google is that YouTube, a lot of times when you're getting video views, it's all coming off of a recommendation video. So you might do an initial search and you'll see the video, but just natural behavior is if there's an associated video that Google recommend or YouTube recommends, you'll probably engage with that as well. So by having all these additional elements on your YouTube channel and your YouTube video, it gives Google the opportunity and YouTube the opportunity to recommend your video after associated video is viewed to get you that engagement. So I think video is great. Just expand. If the thought is maybe just publishing it on your website, I think you absolutely should take into consideration load times and content. But I think the amplification where you can get a lot more exposure will be on YouTube, but they can work hand in hand and you won't be cannibalizing yourself by doing that.
Yeah, make sure you optimize the YouTube videos, add insert keywords in the title and the description, and make sure that you're following the best practices on SEO.
Absolutely.
And Jackie actually has another question. What resources would you recommend to identify the right keywords?
So there are a couple of different tools that I personally use, but everyone tends to use whatever's more comfortable for them. Probably the industry standard for a number of different reasons is probably SEMrush. They have a keyword magic tool in there. It gives you, if you pay for the premium package, which is I think $100 a month or something along those lines, it gives you the result of it gives you an overview of who's showing up for those keywords in Google's front page. It also gives you a lot of search volume information. So I would say from an ease of use standpoint and just a data collection standpoint of what data is available for you when you're selecting your keywords, SEMrush is super helpful. Also, other tools you can use, there's like Bright Edge. You can also use Google recommended keywords. So let's say you're doing a search in Google. Let's say it's like dispensary in Nevada, as an example. There's associated keywords at the very bottom of Google that they'll say, hey, these are some recommended key phrases that people are also searching for that are in relation to the keyword that you're searching. So if you want to scroll to the very bottom, Guillermo, keep on going. Oh, they're not there. That's odd. Generally, there's like a recommendation there. It might just be because it's a local search. But the really important thing here is, there you go right there. If you scroll to the bottom, Guillermo, keep on going right there. So these are also related searches. I think that's another area to really look at when you're identifying the keywords to go after. But what I actually find to be the most helpful is if you scroll back up, sorry, Guillermo, if you scroll back up to that page, not only does it help with keyword identification, but also topic identification. Can you scroll down just a little bit? And it's going to be, oh, shoot, they're not there. It's a section called frequently asked questions. And so it's questions that people tend to ask associated with that keyword, and then landing pages that are associated with those questions. There you go right there. And so what this allows you to do that's super important is that it gives you an up-to-date list of general questions that people tend to ask or what rabbit holes they go down. By looking at these topics, you can then look at the content and look at SEMrush or BrightEdge or another keyword research tool that you might be using, and really start digging into longer tail keywords that are associated with topics that you might want to grow into based off of your primary keyword that you're going after. Also look at Google Search Console for your website to see what people are searching for. So there's a lot of different tools, but I would say if you're jumping off anywhere, start with SEMrush. I think that's an affordable option to use. It's a very, very intuitive tool, and it gives you a lot of great information. And then start looking at Google itself. And if you want to try different tools, BrightEdge is great. Ahrefs is really great as well. So it's really a number of tools that you can use. We just default to SEMrush because it works really well. But more importantly, a ton of data that it collects where some other tools don't collect all that information.
Thank you for that, Sammer. Yeah, I prefer Ahrefs. I've just been using it for a long time, and then also Bright Local if you're running a bunch of locations. So a combination of those. And Jackie, we'll answer the second part of your question here in a second. But let's dive into a Google Ads case study. So let's kind of hop ahead and pull up Ethos as well. So same client, same partner of ours. Ethos they're out of Maryland, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. So Ethos, we're running the SEO campaign, but we really wanted to see results fast. And Google Ads was the best platform for us to really kind of skip the line and start to drive revenue immediately. So we started to do this in early 2020, actually, before we started SEO. So Ethos really wanted to build awareness, drive sales. The company purchased and rebranded some dispensaries in new markets, and they had to make sure that people recognize the Ethos name as a high quality dispensary brand. And they wanted to grow their presence and expand the reach of their e-commerce operations. So, what we did as we began to put together a Google Ads campaign to help grow and create more brand awareness. We used a combination of our Google Ads as well as creating different types of ad types. So dynamic text ads, smart ads, non-branded campaigns, product campaigns. And we did a ton of A/B testing to really get to this $1 million mark. So for the month of March in 2021, that's when we really hit that $1 million mark, and we invested $89,000 in that month, and we generated over $1 million in last click revenue. So just so everyone knows, last click revenue is when a user clicks on a Google ad or any session on the website. So they click on that ad, they browse through the website, they add something to their shopping cart, and then they check out in the same session. So that is a last click attribution that I want to make sure everyone's aware of. And it's really important because paid search and SEO are really supportive in the bottom of the funnel. So when you use a paid search campaign, you're paying for prime real estate. While SEO can help you improve organic search results, paid search, it's advertising, so you can get an instant boost to your website traffic and prominent positioning. So, Sammer, let's dive into this one a little bit. Can you walk us through the strategy for the Google Ads campaign, and really like what did you do to create the campaign, and how did you refine and scale their strategy?
Yeah, so this was probably the most challenging paid search account that I had my hands in. And the reason behind that is because we had really hard return goals to hit. And to your point, we didn't want to look at multi-touch conversions. We didn't want to look at assisted conversions. We really wanted to be last click, which isn't necessarily ideal, but still that was the kind of the goal. And then scaling, right? Scaling was the biggest hurdle to get through because there are a number of locations across different states that have their own compliance. And on top of that, the margins across the different locations were different from a profitability standpoint. So we're kind of considering all of that. And also brand awareness in certain markets was really poor. Other markets, there was a lot of competitors. So there was a absolutely a really robust level of tactics that we had to deploy. And to your point, had to test a lot. But I would say where we really found a lot of success ramping up was after we started to get away from just focusing in on that bottom funnel. I know you hit on Google Ads is really about that mid to bottom funnel, owning that front real estate. And what we saw is that we were gaining, well, by having that strategy in place, we were gaining a lot of impressions, but it wasn't a lot of engagement there because there wasn't a lot of trust within that brand. So we did launch a lot of lookalike display targeting. So really getting in front of people that are previous purchasers that look like those purchasers that are in the same market. So they haven't heard about Ethos, haven't been to the website, but they match a customer profile of somebody who did purchase. Getting in front of those people through some display or discovery campaigns was really important because what we wanted to do is your return users are vital for your business. Every business has a core group of people that are going to come back, but you're not going to grow by just relying on those return users. So you have to find people that mirror those value users and get them into the market and get them down the sales funnel. So the minute we started really targeting those lookalikes, we're also started prospecting in certain audience segments and then re-engaging with previous purchasers. That really solved some of our initial issues that we were having when it comes to engagement. And once we started getting those campaigns humming, we started then starting to roll out local campaigns in different markets. So the local campaigns, the great thing about those is that they are showing up right where Google My Business shows up, and you show up in the #1 search result, and you pretty much are going to get a majority of those clicks. So having campaigns that are localized campaigns that show up in Google My Business, those are in Google Maps, that's huge. And then we also started doing a lot of non-brand targeting. We didn't really focus a lot of our attention on the Ethos brand because we figure if somebody's going to search for Ethos Cannabis in any way, our site organically will show up. And so there was a little bit of protection money, so competitors can't bid on our brand. But what we did is we started focusing on brands that we sell, categories that we sell, started looking at keywords that in Search Console that maybe have a lot of visibility and impressions, but low clicks, and then starting to target those keywords in Google search as well. So then that way we know that there's a market for those keywords, but our organic position is so low, we're not getting the engagement. Our ads are able to fill that gap, and we're able to actually maximize on engagement there. And then as of December of this last year, we started rolling out, whenever Google launches a beta, the great thing about Ethos is that they're like, hey, run it, try it, test it out and see if it's going to perform what we're currently doing. And so we were able to launch Performance Max campaigns and take advantage of a couple other betas that no one in the industry, the cannabis space, was doing. And it allows us to kind of have a little bit of a leg up. Even if those campaigns don't perform well at the time, you're able to tweak, learn. And by the time everyone starts getting on board with them 7-8 months down the line, you have 7 months of testing that you have a bunch of data on, and then you cut in that learning curve. Now, all the other competitors are now testing or trying out a new campaign type that you have 7 months of experience with. And so it allows you to have a little bit of a leg up. So for us, it was really about expanding that upper funnel a little bit more when it comes to targeting, getting some branding plays going, looking at audiences that are high engagers that we can build off of, and then really focusing in on the products and the brands that are having a little bit more profitability for us. And then how do we take SEO information and then use it for paid search? I think that's that last piece that really helped us get over the hump. And just for the overall campaign, that was not a 1 month or a 2 month thing. That has been pretty consistent for about 17, 18 consecutive months now, where $1 million a month, 10 plus return, $90,000 to $100,000 in spent. And what we're now doing is rolling it into Bing, and Bing is now having a similar result. So it's really about looking at the campaigns in the market, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, being honest with yourself, and deploying a tactical breakout on your strategy that's going to allow you to maximize on your strengths and then improve your areas of opportunity that you might be a little bit weaker on.
Awesome. Yeah, I know this is SEO and paid search, like they're long-term plays, right? Like you don't see these results overnight. It takes a lot of kind of strategy and optimization to get to this level and this scale.
Yeah. And the one thing that's makes all these case studies, if there's one aspect that ties them all together, is communication with our partner. Having somebody on the other side of the table who is willing to give you honest feedback, who's willing to really sit down with you and talk about what you're finding, and then give you the opportunity to test something out or really dig a little bit deeper or lean into something that's working a little bit more. That's what really allows us to be successful, and why a lot of these case studies have become case studies is because of that partnership and that relationship and that willingness to really work with us. The partners that are a little bit more hands-off, it becomes a little bit tougher to get here because we do need some feedback and some insights of what's happening at the store level or at the business level that we can't really always see within Google.
Yeah, exactly. How can marketing directors and CMOs keep budgets intact and ongoing as many times when instant results aren't seen by the CFOs and marketing budgets are the first to get cut? Like what can a CMO do to really keep that and improve their case?
That's a great question and a really difficult answer because it's so variable on the CMO, the CFO. I think we all know the CEO is the boss, right? But who really controls your marketing budgets? It's going to be that CFO. They're the ones who will dictate the yes or no for your campaign. So it's really about what KPIs or what directional information, especially if performance hasn't ramped up yet, do we have any initial learnings that are valuable? The one thing that I kind of default back to is a lot of people, a lot of our partners, they really care about owning the space that their store's in. And what I mean by that is having brand visibility, making sure that competitors aren't outranking them, and making sure that you own a lot of that real estate on Google for your local market. And so what I recommend a lot of times, especially as we're ramping up or it's very early, or maybe we're at a situation where it's been 6 months and performance is still slowly getting better, but it's not crazy amazing at the moment, is I like to run a lot of something called share of voice reports. And what that gives us is that you can start looking at your growth patterns for certain key phrases or certain keyword topics compared to your competitors and how much of that real estate you own over time. So what I mean by that is, let's say you really want to rank for dispensary plus specific location keywords, and you have 5 competitors that are really your main competitors in that market. And what you could do is share a voice is that you can start tracking maybe out of 100% pie. At the start, maybe you had 5% ownership of that real estate. And then what you can see over time is you might have started so low that it's really hard to get you into position 1, but maybe by month 5, let's say you're not getting the revenue in yet, but now you went for those key phrases, you own 5% of the market, now you own 15% of the market. So you're seeing directional growth. And then now that last step is, how do you then start getting from directional growth and visibility to higher levels of engagement? And then at the end of the day, making sure that you're nurturing a sale. But I think there's different ways to approach conversations with the CFOs. CFOs, a lot of times from my experience, they want to just bottom line, how much are we making? What's the profitability? I think profitability is also an important conversation to have in that market. But I think there's a couple of different conversations to have. It just really depends on the CFO and then the CMO's relationship and how they're looking at what is the overall business objective and goals that we have.
Yeah, and it's usually pretty straightforward. So what's the investment? What's the revenue generated? They probably won't understand last click and multi-click or anything like that. So keep it high level. And some of these campaigns that we're doing a 10-to-1 return, and that's why the campaigns they've never been turned off, because you're not going to get that return with Weed Maps or any of these other platforms. All right, let's dive on to the last case study here. We're going to take a look at display ads. So this is our partner up in New York. So Vireo really wanted to engage both new and existing customers and drive additional traffic to their New York locations. There was a lot more dispensaries kind of popping up in the area, and they needed it to stay top of mind and ensure that people knew about their delivery service and their different locations. So they have, right now, they have 16 locations across 5 states. So they've scaled since we ran this campaign. So let me go down to the results here. All right. So in the month of April of 2021, Vireo grossed $108,000 in multi-click attribution revenue for the month of April, and with an investment of just over $13,000. And I do want to talk a little bit more about multi-touch attribution, because this is different than Google Ads. So what we're saying here is, those ads that you see on your phone, if you're on the weather app, or if you're on, like a dating app or gaming or one of those apps, and you see those banners pop up when you're in the middle of your Sudoku, that's programmatic advertising. That's a display ad. So, you know, people we're reaching people on when they're playing games and doing other things on their phone. So the way that we attribute that to a sale is we say that, hey, this person saw the ad when they're playing a game, and then maybe a day later, 5 days later, 10 days later, 30 days later, whatever attribution window you choose, they made a purchase in that time through their shopping, your e-commerce menu. And the way that we match this is through what we call a MAID, or a mobile advertising ID. So each of your phones has, it's like a social security number for your phone, and we connect that to the transaction on the shopping cart, and that's how we attribute the sale. So it's a little different than Google Ads. The easiest way to explain it would be, you're driving down the freeway and you see billboards. You're not going to stop and go to that store right away. Like, you're going to see, ABC dispensary, Barbary Coast dispensary, Haven dispensary, and then later down the line, you'll get home, get on your phone, and be like, hey, I saw that ad for Haven dispensary. I want to go visit that. Yeah. So it's really interruptive, and people don't have the same intent to buy as you would with like a Google Ads or a SEO campaign. So when they're searching for product, they're ready to buy. When you're doing display advertising, it's really top of funnel, and you're really trying to make sure that you're top of mind. And that was the goal for this campaign.
That's a really that's an interesting point, Guillermo. And it kind of makes me think that it's very similar in how you maybe view ads on Instagram or on Facebook, where you're not searching for something, you happen to be
scrolling.
And you're getting close to it. Question for you is, when we're thinking about how do we get in front of the right types of people, do we, like, what kind of audiences do we tend to go after? Is it something that we predefine early on? Is it guesswork? Is it something that is very strategic in approach? How do we really select the audiences so that way we're not just spending money and getting in front of people that might not be necessarily the right type of consumer that might purchase from us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing is, we were doing delivery service regions and retail locations. So I'll start with the delivery service first. First thing is, our partner provided us with zip codes. So we knew what zip codes that we should actually target ads in. And the one thing to keep in mind with display advertising is that you can do geofencing, which is a popular buzzword nowadays. You can draw a fence around a store, or I can just do a fence around a zip code or a region or a neighborhood. So that's what we're doing. We're drawing a fence around a set of, let's say, 50 zip codes. So a customer has to walk in those zip codes, or be in those zip codes on their device or on their desktop or on their tablet to even see the ads. And then the second part of that is the targeting. So since we can geofence companies, or anything really, let's geofence every cannabis dispensary in New York, right? So anyone who walks in those cannabis stores and has their location services on their phone using one of those free apps I mentioned, that gets sent to an exchange, and we can buy that consumer data, and we can add that to our targeting. So that's all done automatically, and the consumer list and the segment is refreshing every day, because there's new people getting into that consumer and to that audience. So that's two ways that we at least do the targeting zones, and then also the audience. We also have our own first-party data at MediaJel, where we've ran, upwards of, I think it was like 8 million people have seen our ads over the course of our business. And we've ran $500 million of transactions through our Pixel 2. So we have some of that as well that we can leverage. And then when you're thinking about a retail store, it's really local focused. I know that Vireo has, I believe, like 4 or 5 stores in New York. And one was in Brooklyn, or one was in Queens, one was in other parts of New York outside of New York City. So what we did is we did anywhere from like a 2-mile radius up to a 20-mile radius in rural areas for campaigns. So anyone that is a cannabis consumer and walks within that certain radius of the store, then we want them to see those banners that you see on these mobile apps.
I think with this is that you get an opportunity to be really creative about how you get in front of consumers. And I think the thing that stands out to me whenever I'm looking at display/programmatic campaigns is that, one, you have no restrictive messaging, right? So you can literally call out cannabis, you can have flower on there, you can get really creative with your banners and the assets that you're running. But to your point, Guillermo, what you mentioned is that if you really want to get competitive with your competitors, you can actively target their location.
Pin drop them. Yeah.
And I think, to me, that's amazing. It gives you an opportunity to actively take customers away from the businesses that are directly competing with you, and it gives you an at-bat with them, which is a lot tougher on SEO and a lot tougher on paid search, but it gives you that opt-in, that passive opt-in on display, which is such a leg up in the industry. It's hard to express how valuable it is.
Yeah, and that's really the only channel you can leverage to directly target your competitors. It's like anyone who walks in those stores, they would be put in that audience. You can target them. You can do it in paid search with bidding on their brand names, but that could be quite expensive as well. So, you just have to be smart about it, and just keep in mind the purpose of programmatic display advertising. Right? It's top of funnel. You want to get people's attention. It's really great for new stores, new brands to really get brand awareness, and then pair that with a Google Ads campaign or an SEO campaign, so that when someone sees the Vireo Health brand, they immediately go to Google and then they want to buy. So that we've seen a lift in performance for brand searches in SEO and in paid search from running a display ads campaign. So that's something to keep in mind. And with this one, we had about an $8 return on ad spend. So they spent just over $13,000 and they generated over 100,000. And for us, the scale as far as return on ad spend and reaching that $1 million wasn't as fast as SEO and paid search. It did take us 6 to 12 months to reach that scale. But that's really up to you to kind of balance these three levers, right? Like these three services are all impactful and they have a very high return on ad spend or return on investment compared to a weed maps or billboards, traditional billboards, right? So keep that in mind. I've talked with 3 different partners this week, and their return for weed maps was like 3 or 4 to 1. When you're doing SEO, paid search, it could be like upwards of 10 to 1. So you do the math. You spend $30,000 on weed maps, you get maybe $120,000. You spend $30,000 on paid search, might get 300,000 or plus, more in return on ad spend. So really just to put apples to apples, and where you should actually prioritize your marketing mix for new customer acquisition. And then another thing that you can do is, when we're running these campaigns, not only can we track e-commerce sales, but we can track walk-ins. So since we have the ability to geofence, we can draw a fence around our own stores, and anyone who sees our ad and then walks in to our actual retail locations, we count that as pretty much a conversion as well. So we had 278 walk-ins in addition to all the e-commerce revenue we generated. So, and that's heavily underreported, I would say. So just depending on what point of sale system you have, we may be able to integrate with your point of sale and then track true walk-ins. So, keep in mind when it comes to that for these type of campaigns. But, overall, to summarize this, this session today, the moral of the story here is that your marketing strategy and efforts compound over time, right? You too can generate over $1 million in return on ad spend if your business and your store, your brand, and your team really dedicates time and resources to your marketing efforts. Businesses that invest in a month or 2 or 3 and then pull out because they don't see results, this is incredibly short-sighted, and you're hurting your business overall, because putting in the effort across your marketing channels only pays off with consistency. So I just wanted to make sure that that was a point that I made here. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Samer, thank you again for sharing all your insights. I can talk for hours with you about any of these things. So I appreciate you spending the time with us today and going through these $1 million return on investment case studies.
Happy to be here, and hopefully I get another invite to come back.
Oh yeah, we know you will. And just as a reminder, MediaJel has a compliant ad network of 75,000 plus publishers, including mainstream news sites, the CNNs, the Fox, the GQ, Salon.com, meme sites, dating, gaming, music streaming apps. They all welcome cannabis ads, and we really want to help you in that journey and reaching consumers through mainstream media. So touch base with us through MediaJel.com, and definitely subscribe to us so you can join the upcoming webinars. And thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you everyone.